Welcome to the Wellfuel Podcast, your spot for everything gut health, detox, hormones, a healthy home, mold, and everything in between. I'm your host, Isabel Smith. I'm an integrative and functional registered dietitian and the founder of Isabel Smith Nutrition. Good morning, friends, and welcome back to the Wellfuel Podcast. This is Isabel, and I'm your host, and I'm super excited today to have our guest, Cheryl Hsu, who is the founder of Tiny Health, on with us today. Cheryl is an accomplished and repeat founder of multiple companies, including the nonprofit Moving Forward, as well as a successful consumer software startup that was acquired by Walmart Labs in 2013. In 2014, she was headhunted by the White House to become CEO of Magic, which I did not know, a $30 million funded agency to spur the innovation of ecosystem in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. In 2020, Cheryl founded Tiny Health to take charge of her family's microbiome health after giving birth to her two children, when she realized that early life microbiome imbalances are linked to many chronic conditions later in life, which they are, and that's amazing. Cheryl has extensive expertise in building consumer brands and has raised a total of $34 million. She's an angel investor and advisor to many startups. Cheryl earned her master's degree in engineering management and data mining and her bachelor's degree in operations research and industrial engineering from Cornell. And both on full scholarships. You're incredible. The Tiny Health team includes leading microbiologists, biologists, scientists, and physicians with backgrounds from Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, WashU, Stanford, Cornell, Boston Children's Hospital, and UCSF. Welcome, Cheryl. I almost couldn't pronounce all those amazing accolades that you have because your background is incredible. So I'm not surprised why Tiny Health is such an incredible company.
Oh, I need to cut a lot of it out. It's too much. So next time.
Well, welcome. Super happy to have you. Obviously, we talk about microbiome health and gut health all day, every day, online and with our clients. And it really is the foundation of our beings.
Yes. I mean, it is the Hippocrates said, 1,000 years ago, that all disease begins in the gut, right? And he was right. And not just that, but what is the microbiome? Some people don't even know. I mean, you talk a lot about it, but what is the microbiome and where do we get it from, right? So maybe I'll start there. Did you know that you have 38 trillion microbes living in and on us? And that is the same number, 1-to-1 of human cells that you have. And there was an old number floating around, 10-to-1, but that has been kind of like debunked. It really is 1-to-1, but still it's 50% of when we eat, we're feeding our bacteria 50% of the time, not our human cells, right? Just as much as our human cells. And so it is quite prominent. There's many different sites. There's the oral microbiome. There's the skin microbiome. There's the gut microbiome, obviously, that you talk about so much. And now people know of it as gut health. There's the vaginal microbiome that, when you give birth, if you are a woman, that your baby's passing through that, through a vaginal birth. And there's many other sites too, the ear microbiome and things like that. But the gut is the most studied as it relates to health or disease. It's the most accessible through stool, actually more accessible than skin, because when it's really hard to get a skin sample because there's a lot of human DNA that we have to take out. But the gut is so, kind of like it's inside and there's no oxygen in it. So there's a lot of bacteria that survives in an anaerobic environment. They can't tolerate oxygen. So you get a ton of information about what's in your gut from a microbial perspective.
It's funny you should say that. I feel like I've been telling my clients more and more, right? Like the gut is where so much of it is studied and where so many of the bugs live. But like what's in us is on us, and what's on us is in us, is what I say to my clients all the time. And when you think you're not affecting your overall microbial balance by doing something topically or using a steroid cream or, right, like having sinus stuff, or it's all connected, right?
There's
and they also
skin connection, just as there is a gut-brain connection. Isn't that crazy? Also, the oral microbiome, right? We know that having, sort of like oral issues during pregnancy is very dangerous for your baby, right? And then also extending to that, like just as a regular adult, if you do have if we find oral microbes in your gut, that's not a good sign because your oral microbiome should not end up in your gut. And sometimes we see that. I mean, in the future, we hope to have a metric in our test results that measures how many oral microbes you have in your gut.
Oh, cool. No, it's amazing. And you have such a suite of products, which I'd love to get to because you guys have been just developing and developing and developing. But I'd love our listeners to know, I know how you got here because I've read about you and learned about you, but how did you get here? How did you come up with this?
Yeah, so I, before I started Tiny Health, I had started a different company, as you mentioned. And then in between the two companies, I was just wondering, I was trying to figure out what next company to build. And really wanted it to be mission driven. And it's funny because I didn't think that it would come from my own experiences, but it did. So I had a C-section child 6 years ago. She was breached, and I tried to birth her through a vaginal birth, but it didn't happen. And then 2 years after that, I had a vaginal birth after a C-section. So VBAC at home, actually. In fact, I had a home birth. It's crazy at the start of the pandemic. I know it's like 2020. So when I knew that she was breached, my first kid, I might have to do a C-section, I looked up literature around, like, is there any sort of life health implication to my child, and what can I do to restore if there is? Yeah. And so then I found a lot of literature, like new literature in the gut microbiome world, that a C-section baby born has a different microbial composition from a vaginally born baby. And what does that mean, right? Like, and the reason why is because they're not passing through mom's vaginal canal. And there's, like I mentioned earlier, vaginal microbes that comes to seed baby's gut initially. And then the gut microbes comes through some fecal fluid maybe exchanging during the birthing labor process. So labor is actually really healthy. And then past that, breast milk, the mom is continuing to transfer her microbes to her baby, which is really fascinating. So through a C-section, you're bypassing the vaginal canal, and your baby may be exposed to antibiotics from the operations. So this is actually not limited to C-section babies. It could be also extended to if you had antibiotics during labor, or if your baby needed to go to the NICU and, in early life had been exposed to a lot of antibiotics. So these babies are actually at a higher risk, a microbiome risk, for this triad of allergic diseases that starts with eczema. And kids with eczema have a higher risk of food allergies, and kids with eczema or allergies have a higher risk of asthma and hay fever as an adult. So there's just this progression of allergic diseases. And as you mentioned earlier, the skin and all that, when you're basically it's the first sign that your baby's immune system wasn't trained correctly. So what was astounding to me that I found out is that these microbes that seeds the baby's gut in early life are training their immune system. So eczema is the first sign of environmental allergens in the skin kind of triggering that immune imbalance, because the immune system of the baby is like, well, I don't know what to do about it, because I wasn't trained correctly. And then food allergens, usually between 6 months to 2 years old, is a dietary allergen. Right? And then asthma at 6 years old is respiratory allergen, and so on and so forth. So all these things lead to signal basically saying that, hey, your baby's immune system wasn't trained correctly, which then may lead to other chronic conditions later in life, other maybe autoimmune conditions, metabolic health issues. So when I read this literature, I was like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't help the C-section. Is it my fault? Like I was so guilty. And kind of like trying to find answers in how to restore my baby's gut. And then I found all this other literature that you can in early life. The first 1,000 days, the baby's gut is very malleable, very simple, very low in diversity. And we can dive into the science if you want, why it's so malleable. But I realized, my gosh, like I wouldn't have known if I didn't read the literature that I can course correct and how and all that. So I found all this evidence, and I reached out to the author of the paper at Johns Hopkins. Now became my advisor, my scientific advisor, because I was like, please help me understand. Like, I want to course correct for my child. I was actually a little bit late for my daughter. And then when I was pregnant with my son was when I really started I might need another C-section, because they, sometimes doctors push you to a second C-section, which is not needed. I'm a living proof of that. I had a VBAC at home, which is insane. But it was the best, most magical birth, that I could have had. And I started Tiny Health a week after he was born, because I just felt like this is my life's work. I had a sign that I needed to bring this to the world because of what I was seeking and couldn't find. I couldn't find a baby gut test. And I wanted to measure what was imbalanced about my child's gut and how can I course correct. So that's how Tiny Health got started.
Love it. No, and I know a lot of really nervous first-time moms or moms who've had babies who were C-section. They're like, did I screw it up? Have I created a mess here? It's like, no, by the way, the human body is an incredible machine that when we know enough about it and we can actually look and use tools to assess and learn and course correct, like we are here, right? It's like, no,
Yeah.
the human body is incredibly resilient.
No, and it's needed, right? I mean, my C-section was very needed, my baby, or I could have died. So
Yes.
I didn't want to create this company kind of making parents feel like guilty. Actually, it's the opposite. It's empowering people to understand, well, like, yep, you had a C-section, or yep, you had to give your baby antibiotics, or even your child, your 3-year-old, your 5-year-old, but there's a way to course correct, right? Especially if you understand how like it works and what it leads to. If it's not course corrected, you have the power to do something about it. So that's kind of really why I started the company.
Love that. Yeah, I think empowerment is I find so many of our clients are like, I've done the wrong thing, whether it's about their own health or their baby's health. I've done the wrong thing. And now I'm like really far down I'm like, no, you can always, like learn, find out, find proper tools, work with people,
It's never too late.
Yes, it's never too late, right? Okay, so once you started it, obviously it's taken you a number of years to get where you guys are now. You started with the initial baby test, right? Was that the first product?
It is, yeah. Well, actually, we did launch with the mom pregnancy gut as well as the mom vaginal test too, because what I found is that it's all linked. I have this handy chart here, visual aid, if you can see it. Let me see.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, the mom has the gut microbiome. That's the gut microbiome, and you kind of want this sort of like the bifidobacteria. The Y is bifidobacteria, which unfortunately a lot of adults are missing. It's actually important for overall health, but I was missing that completely. I didn't know that. And then you have to have a good vaginal microbiome because your baby's passing through that ideally. And these like double link green stuff is lactobacillus. So bifidobacteria, the green ones, and lactobacillus are very commonly found probiotics. If you pick any probiotics in the market, you'll find either lactobacillus strains or bifidobacterium or a mix of both of them, right? But from a scientific perspective, your vaginal microbiome should be 99% lactobacillus dominant. Lactobacillus produces lactic acid, which makes your vaginal canal acidic, and you actually want a very low pH acidic microbiome, vaginal microbiome, to starve, keep the pathogenic disruptive bacteria away. So it keeps it healthy. So if you have any sort of itch, smell, unusual discharge, discomfort, you may think it's normal. And certainly I thought it was normal for a while to myself until I measured my vaginal microbiome. I know it sounds very taboo, but I'm like, well, my baby's going to pass through the vaginal canal. So I want to find out what they're passing through, what's colonizing their gut in the first place, right? So there is a healthy vaginal microbiome or an unhealthy microbiome, and somewhere in between. There could be, yeast infection down there and things like GBS, group B strep, things like that. So you kind of want to check in and make sure that you have a healthy vaginal microbiome, because if not, it's actually harder to get pregnant. There's actually a lot of correlation with fertility and IVF success or failure. And if you do get pregnant with because we do see some vaginal samples without any lacto, so it's acidic. It's alkali, and there's more Bacteroides vaginalis, like it's BV, and all that. So that if you do get pregnant with that kind of low lactobacillus state, you could have preterm labor. You're at higher risk for preterm labor. So anyway, basically, even with the C-section, if you have a really healthy vaginal microbiome and you had to have a C-section, you can actually get your doctor to do a vaginal seeding procedure where you're putting a gauze in your vagina, and then when the baby comes out within 2 minutes, you swap her or him, the baby, with the gauze and mimic the vaginal canal, which 2 papers have shown your baby ends up resembling a vaginal birth by doing that. So it's really fascinating. But the gut really is where ultimately we think that you want the lacto. The lacto and BIFs are like best friends. They go hand in hand. If there's no lacto seeding your baby's gut initially, then the BIVs may not seed as well, may not colonize as well. But unfortunately, through antibiotics, maybe poor food, like I had a terrible diet in my 20s. I had antibiotics as a kid. I was formula fed. So I think I had no BIFs and I didn't have any beneficial bacteria anymore. So the reason why we started a pregnancy gut and vaginal test, and you can do it if you're trying to conceive as well, or just a regular adult, you can do it. If you want kids in 5 years or something, or like just for regular health, for good health. Most adults have no bifidobacteria or Archimensea, some of these really key beneficial microbes that you're supposed to pass on to your baby. And so we always tell folks that, if you like check in your gut and your vaginal early on, because it takes this time to course correct, like 3 months, 6 months sometimes, like for missing bacteria to grow in my gut. It did take me 6 months of hard work from a dietary and supplement perspective.
Yeah. And, I'm like hearing it, listeners in my brain as I'm hearing you say this, because I've heard this so many times. They're like, but my doctor told me that probiotics aren't, like, you shouldn't be taking probiotics. There's no benefit of probiotics, right?
The thing here is, well, it's a blanket statement, right? And kind of like that's a little bit of my pet peeve. I don't like blanket statements. I mean, if you take any, like just off the shelf, any probiotics off the shelves, it is a wild, wild west. It's not regulated by the FDA, the health claims and all that. The thing here to know is that I think you just need to be educated about how to pick a good probiotic. Yes. They're not all created equal.
No, they're not.
There are different strains. Like I just mentioned, 2 species. They're not even strains. Species of bifidobacteria and lacto. There's bacillus strains and all that. And beyond the species, there are the strains are the numbers and letters that you see behind the species in the bottle. And that's really important because they have different functions, right? So oftentimes, say a colicky baby or a baby who has eczema comes to us, and their parents have been giving their kids a probiotic, but we see it's completely not doing anything to their gut composition because they're giving the wrong kind of species. Like lacto will never colonize in the gut. It's very rare. Like it's passing through, it's very transient, and you may never find BIFs in the vaginal canal. So it's kind of, you need to know BIFs. Also, there are adult BIFs, but there are infant BIFs. Like B. infantis is what you really want to see in an infant, because it's really adapted at digesting breast milk, for example. And you don't want to, you see that in adults and you want that too. So if you're thinking about, again, kids in the future, you do want to see B. infantis in your gut, which is what I was seeking, frankly. But coming back to your question, it's a matter of, well, what are you looking to solve? Is it bloating? Gassiness? Is it constipation? Is it diarrhea? Like what, IBD, IBS, there's so many different indications. And so specific strains are adapted at helping with different functions.
Yeah. And I think people need to understand that, because I think that's really, so when you are picking a probiotic, this is like, we could have a whole separate conversation about this, and perhaps we should, but when you're picking a probiotic and you look at the back and you just see like a random list of, bifidobacteria, this, lactobacillus, that, without any numbers, and it says proprietary blend, it's like,
I don't trust it, frankly.
Right. It's like, what is that? Where each particular strain has a particular purpose, right? And so you want to be super aware. And again, this is why we have to be careful of companies that are just like, spending bajillions of dollars on marketing and not putting too much science behind their and flashy packages and all the rest of it. And why it's important to make sure you're taking something that's, at the very least, take a probiotic that has the strains and the numbers next to it, right? At the very, very least, if you're like, I don't know what this is, but at least the company is identifying what they're using, which is 100% important.
And then you mentioned evidence too, right? I just came back from Salt Lake City. We had a 3-day probiotic conference where all the probiotic companies in the industry came and talked about it and the issues and sort of like the healthcare provider sentiments and things like that. But like throughout the 3 days, it was resonating that they kept saying consumers now are very educated and they want to know that the company has scientific evidence backing the strains or the formulation, and better if they have clinical study for the formulation. Because what happens is there's a lot of strain specific evidence. This strain helps with this and that. What a lot of companies do is they combine the strains. And so when they combine the strains, when you combine live bacteria, are they competing with each other? Are they like, because they eat food, which is a prebiotic, which comes from our diet usually. There's supplements for that too. But they need prebiotics to survive and colonize, right? So are they are they just going to go and kind of like, pass through and not really colonize? Are they competing? There's a lot of elements that, I'm so glad that the industry is pushing towards that, because traditionally they haven't really considered that.
No, I mean, the evolution, I think even since I've been in practice, which is 10 years, the evolution of all of this is so exciting, because I think we now have people are caring. And I think, smart people are getting, and hopefully this continues to get into the right places, to create products like you're doing that are thoughtfully put together and really like standing behind the research. So, all right, let's talk about tiny health. So let's say, I've got a baby and the baby is super colicky, not sleeping, and I'm like banging my head against the wall and I'm like, what do I do? A good idea would be to run a tiny health
Gut
test.
check. Yes, like as a simple stool sample, especially if you have a baby, they can't communicate with you what's wrong. They're just crying, right? So if your baby is crying excessively, or like you really don't know why, the chances are something is wrong in their guts. And you're changing baby's diaper, 6-8 times a day anyway. It's really easy.
All these visuals.
I know, like the swab. I got it for my Shark Tank. Like I was on Shark Tank last year, and so it's a simple like Q-tip type thing. This is how much you need. It's peanut
Tiny.
butter. Don't worry,
Yep.
it's not stool. And then you put it into a prepaid envelope, and you throw it in the mailbox. And within a few weeks, you get some answers. And I know a few weeks seem like a long time, but we use shotgun metagenomic sequencing, and the industry standard is to get the results back as 4 to 6 weeks. We've optimized that to 2 to 3 weeks because we have such great volume coming from our parents and adults as well. But it is, oftentimes if your baby's colicky, gassy, constipated, we have a lot of eczema babies, food allergies like cow's milk protein allergy, what have you, all the common baby symptoms. Oftentimes, more than not, like maybe 80%, we find that their guts are really imbalanced. What does really imbalance mean, right? A baby gut in the first year should have 50 to 90% bifidobacteria, and not just any type, but 4 specific strains. And this might overwhelm your audience. I'm not going to.
Oh, it's great. No, it's great. We love all of it.
Okay, like B. infantis, B. breve, B. longum, and B. bifidum is what dominate their gut in the first year. So not just any strains. So I was looking for those specific strains. I couldn't find a test that can measure them, so I created Tiny Health. But oftentimes we see babies with 0 bifidobacteria, 0 beneficial, and when there's no beneficial bacteria, what takes hold, takes seed is the pathogenic bacteria, and then we see 90% E. coli, Klebsiella. Maybe strep, staph, things like that. And so it's important to go back to the science behind it. Why, like a baby's gut is not like a tiny or like a smaller adult. It's cannot take an adult test to measure an infant test, is what I learned, because in the early days, so the baby's sterile in the womb. There's no exchange of bacteria. There's no colonization in the womb. When they are birthed, that's when I mentioned they get the vaginal microbes that disappears really quickly, and then the gut microbes from the mom. And so their tummy is really small. Their gut is so small. There's maybe like, if you think of the baby's gut like an island, a barren island, there's only 10 trees, right? Space for 10 trees and coconut trees and whatnot. And then as they grow, like, they don't do solids until 6 months, right? They shouldn't be. Maybe some allergens before that, but and then 6 months they expand suddenly. The island doubles, and there's maybe 50 slots for 50. You have 10 at birth, and then you have 40 more. And what you plant in that island is so crucial, right? And then as an adult, we have a huge complex island now, maybe 500 plants and animals and a whole ecosystem in there. So as adults, like, you can still change it. It's just harder to now unroot it, right? But in the early days, it's really easy to unroot coli and Klebsiella and replant the healthy bacteria. So it is quite crucial, and it's a time you never get back, because as the baby grows older, it's like these trees and animals are training the island's immune system to kind of makeup of it, right? How resistant it is to disease. And health issues and illnesses and viruses and things like that is dependent on that makeup in the early days.
I was a super colicky baby. My mom stopped breastfeeding me at 3 months. I was given formula. I grew up in the UK.
You
I
did?
had
You don't have a UK accent?
no, no, I grew up in the UK. We moved when I was 6. I did have an accent.
Wow.
But I had a milk protein allergy and they fed me, unhydrolyzed soy milk. And so I had asthma as a child. I never really skin stuff, but like a ton of asthma, hives, allergies. But at that point in time, like, right, they were like, they weren't even connecting the fact that, baby cries, they might have a problem with their tummy, right? I say to my mom all the time, I'm like, how did you not know when you fed me and I screamed that there was a problem? And she's like, Isabel, it just wasn't where the conversation was. Right. And so I think for us now, there's, looking forward to future generations. I'm so grateful that we now have these tools, because I think our environments are worse than they were when like you and I grew up. Right. And so I think that we did all right because we had limited resources in this realm. But I think our environments have become more and more and more toxic and more difficult for our bodies. So as parents and as humans, if we can start to like understand how these plants that grow and have deep roots, and then have animals and other species in the environment on this island, can be reformulated and pruned. So let's say we get this test back and you're like, again, baby's like not sleeping and screaming, and okay, we see we have no bifido and we've got Klebsiella and we see a lot of E. coli and other stuff. Then what happens for
Yeah,
mom?
I didn't want to, when I built this company, one was empowerment, right? As I mentioned, more control to you, if you, more knowledge is power. And I didn't want to scare people with just data, like tons of data. It has to be actionable. And all the action plans that we recommend from a dietary or nutrition perspective, supplements and lifestyle, so 3 elements of it, has to be backed by evidence. Because, again, there's a lot of snake oil, sketchy signs out there. I really wanted everything to link back to a PubMed article, which is in a journal, a published journal. And like, if we're recommending you adding resistant starch, and these are the foods that have resistant starch because your gut is lacking that, here are foods to eat. Like, don't eat ripe bananas, eat more green bananas. I didn't know this for a long time because I'm Asian. I used to eat piping hot rice, and apparently that like, you have to cool it down, because if you cool down rice and potatoes, it retains the most resistant starch. So I learned so much, even from that perspective, from a dietary perspective, for what my specific gut needs. And then a lot of parents do, or just adults as well, do like supplements, right? It's in a way like depends on your philosophy. Sometimes if there are severe imbalances in a gut, I like to use supplements for a short course to tackle it quickly, because especially if you're experiencing symptoms or your baby's experiencing symptoms, then you may need a short course. But I feel like, personally, I don't like to take supplements endlessly, because I don't think that's the best bioavailable way to get the nutrients that you're lacking, or the probiotics, prebiotics you're lacking into your system. You have to maintain it through diet. So really like this dual method of, let's just find what supplements can help you tackle things and maybe bind some toxins and things like that. And then you kind of use the dietary thing for long-term sustenance, right? And then there's lifestyle. So lifestyle is actually quite important. And here's where some health coaching and functional health coaching may be really helpful. If you're not already working with one and you have severe issues, highly recommend one. Like Isabel is a fantastic one. Life coaching is important because I think there's so much, like you said, toxins. I had to learn that antibacterial soap is terrible because, especially there's some banned chemicals in there that can stay in your system for years. Thankfully, triclosan is banned now. They used to be in Colgate antibacterial toothpaste. And when you brush with that, and it's thankfully banned now, it stays in your toothbrush for years, 3 years. So dump that toothbrush if you've ever used a antibacterial Colgate toothpaste.
Scary.
There's just a lot of chemicals that actually are banned in the UK and Europe, but are present here, right? Like dyes and things like that. So like, we do a lot of education in household cleaning supplies too. to use non-toxic, especially if you have a baby who's crawling on your floor and you've just used a Clorox and they're like licking it. It's going into their system and having an antibacterial effect. And they don't just kill bad bacteria, they kill all like good bacteria too. So sometimes in our gut test results, we see babies with 0 unfriendly bacteria, and you don't want 0 E. coli. For babies, actually, you want 5% is actually helping to train their immune system. So you don't want none, you don't want 90%, you actually want maybe 5 to 10%, and the rest should be bifidobacteria. So there is a scientifically backed balance of good and bad bacteria in a baby's gut in the first year. And then as they grow, eat more solids, go to daycare, get exposed to animals and nature, ideally, they get diversity, and you want to see the diversity come in really, really quickly. And then from that point on, post 1 year, your baby should have, it's funny, we have so much data now, more than 30,000 families have come to us, like
so cool.
C-section, formula-fed babies initially have high diversity, which you don't want. And then vaginally born breastfed babies have very, very low diversity. And post, like, I think weaning, maybe say 1 year, it kind of kicks off, like they cross curves. So the breastfed, vaginally born babies diversity shoots up, and then the C-section, formula-fed babies diversity kind of, it's not as high. So it kind of reverses, which is really interesting science, I find. And that's what map. Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard of a study, this was a long time ago. This was like probably 8 or 10 years ago, that was looking at the difference between a child who was brought up on a farm or nature, whatever, and they had like dirt and the versus the child who grew up in the city, right? I think they had the same total population of bacteria, but the diversification of the bacteria, of the microbiome, was so vastly greater with the kid who grew up in nature, right? I think they had roughly the same total bacteria, but the kid in the city had like so much less. It was so many fewer strains of total than the one that grew up in the farm.
I try to put my kids in nature school with as much outdoor exposure as possible. Because, if you used to, in the 80s, or maybe in the 60s, we used to live on farms, maybe not in the 80s, but maybe like our ancestors, right?
Yeah.
Used to live on farms and spend 90% of the time outdoors. And now it's the reverse. We spend 90% of our time indoors doing this podcast. But after this, I'm going to go out for a walk in my garden, because I know how important that is. And having pets too. So we do like, have really like tips like that. Oh my gosh, it's so cute.
Henry's been sitting in my lap because he's whining today. Aww. But yes, so him licking my face helps my microbiome.
Dogs and puppies and cats too, they go outside. They're like, they have to go outside, right? What they're doing, actually, the reason why households that have pets, their kids have fewer allergies, and there's many papers showing that they bring in the outdoors indoors. They're bringing in the dirt. Actually, we're so afraid of dirt, and we sanitize and clean everything now, but there's healthy dirt that you should get in your system.
It's so important. And I think, right, like I don't know how much you know about my story, but I've been dealing with Lyme disease. And so I've been on a lot of antibiotics in the last couple of years, because when you weigh the risk of like antibiotics or chronic Lyme disease, the chronic Lyme disease usually wins. I've been taking probably like 8 probiotics, individual probiotics, different ones a day. My gut's been totally, totally fine, but people kind of look at me and go like, how have you sustained that? And I'm like, literally, I'm taking gut lining support, colostrum, collagen, 8 different probiotics, Tributrin. Like, I am working super hard, eating super well, not drinking, like trying to keep my gut happy, especially as a person who grew up with allergies. And the wild part about all of this for me now is I had all these allergies growing up, and I don't have any food allergies anymore. So the allergies that I had as a small person and through most of my life have resolved in the last 2 years, which is wild. I can now eat dairy without any problem. I don't go crazy on it, but I can do it if I want to. Right. So I think the memo, and that's what we talk about a lot online, is like, you can course correct and you can take care of your body. And I think that's a very important mindset. Now, you and I talked briefly before about the power of correcting the microbiome in a little person when it comes to sleep. Can you talk to us for a few minutes about that? How that can make a difference for somebody who's been having babies not sleeping and affecting their microbiome might help that?
Yeah. And which mom or dad doesn't want their babies to sleep well at night, right?
Yes. Sorry, I
It's
don't.
funny 'cause my daughter, so she was born C-section, and she's the one with eczema, food sensitivity, she had gluten intolerance and things like that, constipation. She couldn't nap more than 45 minutes as a child, as a baby. And even now, she's not a good napper. My son, who's the VBAC one, he, as a baby from the get-go, could nap for 2 to 3 hours. And I'm like, same mom and dad, genetics and all that, and they were born 2 years apart. But their birth mode was different, and what bacteria they were born with was different. And my son had 90% bifidobacteria, the one that you want the ones that I mentioned, because I knew from that point, I'd done my research with my first child. I didn't want to repeat it with my second child, and I didn't get my daughter's microbiome in the early days, but I suspect that she didn't have bifidobacteria. So again, that BIFs in early life is the most crucial bug that you want to see in your baby's gut, and they have to be the right kind. Because if they're an oral BIF, for example, BIF dentium is like oral, dental, in your baby's gut, that's not the right kind, and they are still going to be colicky, and they're not going to sleep well. So there is a signature for sleep, and you may think, I don't know, like different parents have different philosophies around sleep training and things like that. Obviously, you have to create the environment that's healthy and conducive for sleep. But beyond that, if your baby isn't napping well, there is probably a gut issue. And so it's interesting because, like we've seen, again, so many babies now, and we have a lot of longitudinal data, and also the connection between mom and baby, right? Or sibling and baby, and dad and baby. And dad can pass on their bacteria to baby too. So it's funny because my husband has metabolic health. And I know that because we wore CGM, like a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah.
So we both ate a banana at the same time, and I spiked like crazy and he didn't spike. I'm like, what? This is not fair. When we see our gut microbiome, he has Archimencia, this one microbe that's so crucial for gut lining. You mentioned gut lining earlier, and metabolic health as well. And, it kind of does have some diabetic connection and things like that. And I'm not I'm not diabetic or anything, but my glucose spikes are not as good as his. And I was missing Archimencia. So I've been actively trying to boost my Archimencia the past year. It's one that's really hard to boost if you don't have it.
Yes.
It's really hard to engraft, but dads can pass it on to baby. So
that's so cool about the dads can.
I was telling my husband, pre-chew the meat and give it to my son when he was starting solids. I know it sounds really icky, but transfer your bacteria to my baby, and they do. There's a recent last week, U.S. News published this paper, or wrote about this paper, maybe in time for Father's Day, that dads, this new paper said dads actually do contribute quite a bit to the baby's gut. So it's important. That's why we have a test for adults too, because we actually can show what strains you all share in your house. And oftentimes parents come to us, they're trying to course correct their baby's sleep or eczema or colic or allergies, whatever. And then we always tell them in our kind of consultation with them, you can't just, course correct your baby's gut. Your gut health matters too. Because you know what? They're going to eat the same foods you cook and buy. They live in the same environment. They're getting as much outdoors exposure as you. So you have to also look into your gut as well. Older child, and course correct, or not may not have anything to course correct, but you need to adapt the healthy, gut friendly dietary supplement and lifestyle nutrition that you're adapting for your child, your baby.
It's more than just the baby. It's the whole environment. It's the whole family. I think if I had a dog growing up, it would have helped my allergies. I say, my mom and I have this conversation all the time. She's like, I know, it would have been the best thing. Right. I'm like, what we only can do with what we know. I'm so excited for our listeners to hear this podcast. I'm really excited because we have a special discount code for our listeners, which is with code Isabel at checkout. You can get $20 off your first purchase. So guys, go check out tinyhealth.com and go check out their Instagram handle, which is just Tiny Health, right?
Yes, it's actually at tiny.health.
20.health.
Yeah, one
Right.
day we'll get Tiny Health, but you can also, and you have any questions, you can write in at hello@tinyhealth.com. I still, despite, us having served almost 30,000 families, I read almost every hello at Tiny Health emails because I care so much about all parents' experience and, what they're facing. And, I want to know more about who is coming through.
Love that. Well, we're really excited for all the research and the care and the love that you're bringing to the gut health and a physical health world, because this goes far beyond your gut. This goes into your whole being. And, I'm always super inspired by founders and people and women like you who are just like in there trying to get us all moving forward in a healthier way. So thank you, because what you know and your knowledge and your dedication to all this is incredible, and your products are amazing. And I'm just excited for our listeners to learn. So guys, thank you for listening. Please, send an email to Tiny Health if you have a question, pop on their website, take a look at what they have, use that wonderful discount code that we just shared. And Cheryl, thank you so much for being here. We'll have to do this again. And there's so many more things you and I can talk about. So
I know, maybe a probiotic one next, pre and probiotic one.
I think we'll have to schedule that.
Yeah. In the conference, talks about postbiotics too and butyrate function, but
we'll have to do a pre, pro, and post, because I think that would be really wonderful for our audience. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the work that you do in spreading the word and the education around this. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for listening. See you guys right here next time on the Wellfuel Podcast.
As always, thanks so much for listening to the Wellfuel Podcast. We're so happy to have you. To make sure you don't miss a beat, please subscribe either on Apple or Spotify, because we have episodes dropping once or more a week with tons of great content. If you want to make sure that you're up to date on everything we're doing in the business with our clients and new offers and all the things, make sure that you check us out at Isabel Smith Nutrition on Instagram and isabelsmithnutrition.com. See you guys soon.